Alright, now I usually don't make videos like this, especially straight away on a game that hasn't even released. But this video is a pretty serious topic on Dune Awakening. If you don't know, Dune Awakening is a survival MMO that's set to launch on May the 20th, but there is a huge problem that I want to talk about in today's video, and in fact it's such a big problem that it gives me very big concerns. So, if you don't know, in Dune Awakening now, the image you're looking at is how the server infrastructure is going to work in the game. Effectively, to start off with, there is a PvE zone. This is called the Haga Basin. Now, this image is AI upscaled because the original was such good quality. I'm going to keep it completely blunt and completely truthful. Now, I'm not going to hold back in this video. I'm going to be quite blunt with Funcom because this is a very big problem. So again, the Haga Basin, it's called the Haga Basin on this AI upscale. Classic AI, doesn't know how to do text, but it's called the Haga Basin. Just pretend to say the actual name of the thing, right? So there are layers in the Haga Basin. There can be, I think, up to 9 layers. There could even be more, and there can be around 40 players per Haga Basin, right? This is the crux of the problem. So the deep desert, this is the in-game zone. I'm not really going to talk too much about this. This can support hundreds of players, I think up to 900, maybe even more, which is not the problem. In fact, that's fantastic. Same with the social hubs and Arrakis, Harko Village, those are the 2 social hubs. That's great. They can support heaps of players. The problem is Haga Basin. The Haga Basin can only support 40. And you're probably thinking to yourself, that sounds like there is going to be a crapload of queues at launch. And you're right. This is going to lead to an absolute clusterfuck of queues. I'm talking New World 2.0, potentially even worse. Now, at the launch of New World, at least servers supported 1,000 players. Way back in New World launch, they can support 3,500 now, by the way. But at launch, New World could only support 1,000 players. Now, for Dune Awakening, you have the same problem, but a server can only support 40. And there potentially might only be 9 Haga Basins per world. So down the bottom right here, you can see that there's worlds. Each world has a deep desert. A world is basically a server. So there's a world has a deep desert that's interconnected with all of the Haga Basin layers, and everybody can communicate, play with each other, whatever. The problem is that the Haga Basin can only support 40 players with up 9, maybe more layers. And again, that's where the queue problem comes in. You're probably thinking, what happens if I have a guild or want to play with my friends? That's not happening. If you want to play with your friends on launch day, you're probably going to be on a completely different Haga Basin, more likely on a completely different server. And you're probably thinking, what if you want to group up with your guild? By the way, the guild cap in Dune Awakening is 32. So you're probably thinking, Haga Basin is 40 players, but a guild cap is 32. So if you want to have a permanent guild base, because the deep desert resets every week, and have logistics, so you bring your resources from each deep desert week back to the Haga Basin, that is going to be near on impossible to get your whole guild in one Haga Basin. I'm talking literally impossible. Because, let's think about it this way. If everyone on launch day caps out each Haga Basin with 40 players, respectively, let's say over a week that becomes 30 players. 10 players stop playing, right? So now there's 30 active players on that Haga Basin. Now we bring in 10 new players to take in those slots of those players that stop playing. So now we have another 10, and now it's at around 40 again, 40 players in the Haga Basin. What happens is the following week, another 20 players drop off and 20 new players come in. Now there's, I don't know, 70 bases in that Haga Basin, and it has 70 unique players on it. So there are 70 players in total that have had a base on this Haga Basin. And let's say there's an update. Maybe the queues have died down and they think they can come back and play the game because the queues aren't as bad anymore. Well, if those 70 players come back because they think the queues have died down, now there's going to be 40 players plus a 30 player queue during peak times. And you got to keep in mind, this is regional. So everybody's generally going to be playing at the same time because it's, again, the same region, unless you're a degenerate like me. But if you're just a normal person that has work, comes home, plays games, and you're all trying to get onto the same Haga Basin where your base is, there's 70 players with 70 bases in that Haga Basin, and you can't access yours because there are 30 other players in front of you in queue, you're probably not going to get to play or get to go and revisit your base the whole night. You log off at night on your server. Here's an even worse scenario. If you're a day one player and you join a server, you play for 8 hours, right? You get your base actually quite set up. You're pretty happy with your progress and you want to play the next day. People will log in before you and have taken your spot. Next thing you know, you're in another 100 player queue to get onto the server where all of your progress is. Now you can start to see where the problem is, even beyond just playing with your friends. This is a massive clusterfuck that is going to legitimately cause New World 2.0 levels of fuck-ups. This is going to make people quit, stop playing the game, and right when you think there's people that are enjoying the game, they're going to be in a queue just to get back to the character they had progress on, because everyone else is trying to get into their same layer of the Haga Basin. Now, there might be server locking, there might be some sort of server locking infrastructure, but that stops. What's the point then? Now you can't play with your friends. If I want to travel to a different Haga Basin, oh, it's locked. I can't put my base on that Haga Basin with my friend because, well, you know, someone else has locked that server because of the server cap, if there is a server cap. And regardless if there is a server cap, maybe there's a queue on that Haga Basin where your friend is playing. You want to go visit and level up and play with your friend, but there's 40 other players in front of you on a 40 player server. Or a 40 player layer, sorry. They're called sitches, by the way, or sitches, or whatever. I'm calling it a layer. It's simple, you guys understand it, no fancy terminology needed. Now, the big problem I have with this is the deep desert supports hundreds of players, so why is this a problem? Why are we splitting up into such small player groups in the Haga Basin when we have the technology to implement that from the deep desert? Moreover, there is a solution where you could legitimately solve this by simply disassociating your base from the Haga Basin and simply having the Haga Basin be a PvE zone with no bases at all. And instead you build your base in the overworld. Now, if you don't know what the overworld is, it is the interconnected world of all of the different, I guess, areas you can visit in the server or in the world. So you have the deep desert, you have the Haga Basin, you have Arrakis, and you have Harko Village. You can travel between all of these with your ornithopter in something called the overworld map. This is the overarching connected space you can travel through. My idea, not my idea, this is not my idea, I don't want to be a dick. Someone talked about this idea and I thought it was genius. What if, instead of your base being in the Haga Basin that has a terrible server cap that's going to be Q World 2.0, instead you had a instanced base plot in the overworld map that you could visit with your friends, with your guild, and have a guild instanced base in a completely different area that voids the queues entirely. Now, that does take away from the idea of having a lively world with a bunch of bases in the Haga Basin. That's going to be in the deep desert anyways. People are going to be building outposts in the deep desert. It's massive. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a thing in the Haga Basin. Now you might say, oh, that takes away the survival aspect of coming across cool creations and such. Again, that can happen in the deep desert. This is a massive oversight by Funcom that is fundamentally going to cause a lot of problems. And I don't care what Funcom comes out and says, they need to publicly address this and come up with a solution. I'm not saying this from experience, I'm saying this from public information, that this is going to cause a very similar situation to a game that had the same problem, and it truly did almost kill the game. So many players quit New World on launch day because of this server problem, and if it happens again in this game, we know what to expect. So, Funcom, if you're watching this, do something. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.